Good to have you back, Kane. Missed you last week.
Yes, I was sunning myself on the Gold Coast, just having a bit of a mental refresh.
I'll tell you what it is. I always remember that you started back on radio on January 3, which I just rolled my eyes out. And I couldn't believe you took a break with 2 weeks to go, 3 weeks to go in the home and away season.
It has been every day since that point in January 3. So probably not a bad time with the Channel 9 shows off. But we're back, and we're back with a bang. Hoyney, your overall observations, I should say, is where we start. And where are we going tonight first up?
Well, I just wanted to quickly, before we start that, loved your discussion, Ria, before the show.
I had a debate with Kingy on Friday, and I said, is Alia the best key defender in football right now? And Kingy, he honestly laughed at me. And then we came back from ad break, he said, you know what? I reckon Rory Lobb is a better defender than Alia. And we're going to start to compare notes and the finish to the season between Lobb and Alia. Well, advantage Alia. Once again on Saturday night, he stated his case as to why he, along with Harris Andrews, is the best defender in the game right now. His last 8 weeks have been nothing short of extraordinary, and I reckon it's time that he starts getting the recognition that he deserves. Let's start watching Alia a little bit closer and what he's doing for the Port Adelaide Football Club, because right now, along with Harris Andrews, he's the best defender in football. So the numbers back that. So a lot of my observations are, look, from time to time I'll ask you for some clarification and stats will support my argument, but I usually start with the opinion and then get the stats to, and others work it differently. That's just how I do it. Do the stats back up that opinion?
Absolutely, it does. So, the last, and ironically, his form over the last 6 weeks has been superb, and it's actually coincided with Asava not being down there.
Right.
And him actually sort of, taking the second main forward behind Zerk Thatcher. So his intercept work over the last 4 weeks in particular has been superb. And he's now having the impact on matches that we saw at the level of 2021, where I think he might have been All-Australian that season. The only one that I've got for you is, you mentioned Harris Andrews and Alia. Did you miss the number 20 from West Coast by any chance?
No,
Jeremy McGovern?
I did, because I heard your thoughts last week. I saw them online, and I know that you've got him in the Pantheon right up the top.
Did you see his game on the weekend against North Melbourne?
Can I just put my hand up? That was a game I only watched the finish of because I was flying, and the Virgin...
Taking a break.
No. I was flying. I was on the plane, and the Virgin internet isn't the best to toggle between games, so I was locked on the one game. And then I landed and I saw the result, and I was like, oh boy. So I went back and watched the finish. But tell me about it then.
Well, he's having to take the main man at the moment because of Tom Barras. So he did that the week before against Ben King and played one of the best last quarters you've seen by a key defender. And then on the weekend, he goes to a key forward who I think we all rate in Nick Larkey, who gets supplied with 59 inside 50s, keeps him to 1 goal, and then does what he does offensively again. It is freakish what this guy does.
How many of them have you got in your All-Australian team? The key defenders.
I think I mentioned this to someone yesterday. Like the defenders, I think is going to be the hardest spot for you this year to actually fill, because there's so many in there that I think that can be in there. This guy is on another planet by himself, and then the likes of Harris Andrews, Collins, Alia over the last couple of weeks. Wiedering, I've probably got a little bit down on that, but I think that position is going to be one of the hardest for you to actually fill.
The third sort of tools, your Blakeys and your Ryans and Sicilies and these types of players that probably take the third tool.
And the running halfbacks as well. Good luck with that.
The running halfbacks are absolutely stacked. All right, what else you got for us off the top?
So, I just wanted to have a conversation around expectation to reality. And I think it's natural that, as a person and as an industry, that you just get used to either a team's performance or a player's performance when they've performed at such a high level for a long period of time. And that almost just becomes a little bit boring. Then when someone else comes along in that same position or whatever it might be, and is having a year that is sort of, for them off the charts, it gets recognised more and appreciated more than the elite performer who's done it for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And what I want to talk about is the ruck position. And I know that you can't, sort of say too much around this, but we've talked a little bit on this show around Tristan Cherry this year, and he's been, we've mentioned him a lot in the, who the coaches have missed, right? And he is having a fantastic season. He's a top 50 player in the competition off our new rating system, and he's going really well. But for God's sake, the number 11 from Melbourne, Max Gawn, is having one of his best seasons that we've seen. It's actually his best season that we've seen in 6 years.
What?
I know it was off Broadway this game. Melbourne, Port Adelaide.
He was. Honestly, I kept saying every time Port had the ball, they're going to kick it to Max Gawn. Like I was in at the AFL, we had both games on, but I was watching this game. Every time they went down the line or they went inside 50, they kicked it to Max Gawn. And he won 8 free kicks or something as well from stoppage, which probably helped his performance as well. But he was unbelievable on Saturday night.
Some of his intercept marks are literally on the goal line and outmarking, Charlie Dixon a couple of times and just doing things that we just almost just take for granted that that's just what Max has done for years. And Cherry deserves the accolades that he gets. He's had a fantastic season, and potentially he'll get recognised in the All-Australian squad, and time will tell and what have you. And I'm sure Max will probably get recognised in the All-Australian squad as well. But I just want to just put it out there that what Max is doing, we shouldn't be taking it for granted and just assuming that this is, expected. And it's sort of like, it's a little bit like Jack Sinclair. Jack Sinclair's having a year at the moment where he's going extremely well. 2 years ago, he came from nowhere and everyone's getting, sort of giving him the accolades. Now that's almost expected that he's not getting the recognition. Brent Daniels last year came from nowhere, got the recognition, got the accolades. How good's this guy? He's having an equally as good a season this year. Number 1 score assist player in the competition, but I don't feel like he's getting the same accolades. And I'll be interested in in 2 players if I can, just what happens next year. Jake Waterman's getting the recognition and accolades this year off the back of what he's doing. It's a year that's sort of come from nowhere, and fair enough. If he produces similar outputs this year, I'll be interested to see whether or not that that recognition is at the same level as what it is in 2024. And same for Massimo D'Ambrosio, who we've spoken a lot about on this show. He's flying and deserves the recognition that he's getting. But if he plays at this level next year, will he get the same recognition that he's received this year? So it's just something a little bit different.
It's a good one, and it is one of those ones where you have those conversations in the All-Australian meeting. You absolutely do, and I think Nathan Buckley was broadcast saying this when the cameras were in. Are we just rating him against his own standards, or are his standards better than the next best? It's just that he's that good that we don't recognise them the way that. So it's exactly what you are saying, and sometimes you are a prisoner to your own brilliance, which a few players are. If you've got an example of that, 04-339 out of 11-16. I mean, Langford's probably another one from the Bombers where he just jumps out and has this unbelievable. He is probably
last year,
not that. He's definitely down on form, but if you look at where he sits on goals kicked, he's right up. No one's mentioning Langford this year. So it's a good one. What else in this overall observation?
Just very quickly, last week we brought in the new segment of Get It Done, and August is almost just Get It Done month when you come up against slippery games that you just can't afford to drop it because it's going to really derail your season. We threw 2 games out there last week. Port Adelaide had to come to Melbourne and just get that game done. Yeah, it was a terrible game of footy. It was a hard game of footy to watch. Who cares if you're Port Adelaide? Because right now you're in position to get second spot in the ladder. You lose that game, you're vulnerable. The Dogs had to go to Adelaide against Adelaide with all the recognition and praise that they received and just had to get that done. They didn't. Top 4's gone. Now that he's going to improve an enormous challenge to win the flag from wherever they start. And potentially it's going to get to round 24 to beat GWS to even make it now because they've dropped that slippery game.
Yeah, when you look at for the Dogs, you're exactly right. When you look at their starts of the year, and that's why you just got to bank those wins early. You just got to bank them. You got to be able to give yourself a position to finish top 4 so you can win it. You can't win it outside the top 4. No one's winning it outside the top 4 with a competition like this and the small margins. And they just left themselves far too much room. Yeah, at the start of the year, you go, okay, we play Adelaide and Adelaide probably 30-70 we're going to win this because Adelaide are on but the fact that they left them so much room to work with because of the slow start, then it was a do or die game, one that they just weren't able to cope with the pressure of that. Let's get into you got one more.
So just before we finish that, just to get massive Saturday night of footy this week. Forget it done. Port Adelaide against Adelaide.
Yeah.
Geelong against St Kilda. The definition of two
because they're not easy.
Done game. They are not easy.
They may sound easy, and the odds will tell you that they're easy, but they're not. They're not at all. And
they're not.
Particularly for the Cats, this game at Marvel as well is
dangerous.
Another problem for them. And Adelaide will get themselves up for this. They'll be better without Taylor Walker in the side. Their forward line is flying, and I mean this is their grand final. It's the only thing that they can have bragging rights to knock off Port Adelaide.
Great night of footy for us.
Yeah, it's a ripper.
Just to get through.
All right, let's move on to your 7 main talking points. You want to start with accuracy because, gee whiz, this cost a few teams on
it did.
The weekend.
It was a massive weekend for it, and I know and I get that it's it can be boring, and I understand that, right? But the reality is that over the last 3 final series, 7 of the 27 games have been decided by accuracy. So that's 2 every final series. So work that out. Week 1 of final series, on average, there'll be 1 game that will be decided by accuracy.
So you judge that by expected scores?
Correct.
Yeah.
Both for and against. So right now, over the last 6-week period, this is where it's interesting. The Dogs are 18th, Brisbane are 15th, Port are 14th, and it almost cost them a game on Saturday night. And Geelong are 13th, and it almost cost them a game on Saturday against Freo as well. On the flip side, GWS 1, Hawthorn 4, Freo 6. So it's sort of, and everything with accuracy, I believe, eventually sort of comes back to to average. So like for Essendon, take Essendon for instance, right? Their game on the weekend against Gold Coast was the pin-up game for this, right? So everyone talks to me about their 1 goal 9 in the last quarter and that cost them the game. I get that, right? But the game should have been over at 3/4 time if Gold Coast had taken their chances. They're 5 goals up, 6 goals up at 3/4 time. Game's over. That 1 goal 9 doesn't even matter. So Essendon's season has gone 5 of their first 7 wins. They should have actually lost if the opposition and them had a kick to expectation. Now over the last 5 losses, they should have actually won 4 of them. Brisbane start to the year. Their first 8 weeks of the year, their accuracy was terrible. Their results reflected that. Then their accuracy jumps up into top 6. They get on that run on the weekend, cost them massively. Melbourne last year, it cost them towards the end of the season. So it's going to be something that is, I get it, it's boring, it's not sexy, but it is so important. And if you're the Dogs, Port, Brisbane and Geelong, right now that is a red flag to what's happening and could cause you concern come first week of finals.
Yeah, I wonder with Darcy, because he's going to get so many shots. He looks really rock solid from probably inside 30, just to me, and we'll speak to Brad Johnson, and he'll be the best person to speak to this tomorrow night. But outside of 30, I think he loses any penetration with his kick and any flow through the ball. And I think a lot of the shots that he had, and without having the numbers in front of me on Sunday twilight, were outside that 30 range where he just struggled for momentum and a little bit of distance. He kicked 1 goal 5 with 1 out in the full. So, I mean, the positives, there's plenty to find with him, but that's one area to work on. We'll speak to Jono tomorrow night about that. Can the Giants win the flag?
Not at the moment.
Right.
Not with what they're doing at the moment. So again, we'll follow the accuracy component. So just keep in mind the Essendon and how that got back to normal, and Brisbane and how that got back to normal on the weekend. Melbourne last year. Right now, GWS have won 6 in a row. 3 of those games should have well gone to the other way. Should they have kicked to expectation, and should their opposition have kicked to expectation. So what Brisbane did on the weekend should have been close to 50 points up at quarter time, game over. Finished, all over. The Gold Coast, I don't know if you remember the Gold Coast game 4 weeks ago, Kane, on a Saturday afternoon, they absolutely, completely butchered it in the first half in front of goal. That was the day Ben King kicks 0 goals, 6 from 8 shots,
Windy
whatever
day,
it might have been. So, and there's one thing where your accuracy is strong, and at times you've got to reward that, and you've got to reward those individuals from your team. Maybe you've got a team full of accurate players. But then the other way, when the opposition are inaccurate, that is simply you as a team shutting your eyes and just praying that they're going to have a bad day in front of goal. And right now, that is what their opposition are actually doing. Their opposition has the third worst accuracy of any team in the competition at the moment. They're conceding shots at goal, far more shots at goal than what Brisbane are, than what the Dogs and what Geelong, than what some of the best defensive teams are in the competition. So right now, over a 6-week period, this is their profile. This is why it's massive red flags at the moment. They are the 5th worst team in the competition at turning possession into score. So offensively, they've got no real threat other than the accuracy component in front of goal. They're bottom 8 for actually defending the opposition, so actually restricting the opposition from turning their possession into a score. Their turnover game is bottom 8 in the competition. Their clearance game is bottom 5 in the competition. Their ability to defend ball movement is bottom 4 in the competition.
Jeez.
They're number 1 for pressure, so you give them that. They have a crack.
Yep.
They're going to hunt you. They're going to try and make their life a bit difficult in that aspect. But in terms of what we look at big picture-wise, if that profile there continues for the next couple of weeks, forget about where they are at the moment. I'll be shocked if they start this finals campaign inside the top 4. And potentially that means that they're starting from 5th or 6th and getting drawn a Dogs or a Hawthorn first final. We don't overreact to the W's and L's. We look at the big picture side of things. If that doesn't change, they are not winning a flag
Who do you
this
like
year.
this weekend then?
Off
Freo.
that, if that doesn't change, I think Freo are absolutely every chance to knock over GWS this week. Absolutely.
All right. Hey, what do you make of the way that they try and manipulate their forward matchups more so than their defenders? It's a really interesting subplot to the way that they're playing, and largely they're winning this battle at the moment. And we've spoken to Sam Mitchell about it. He said, look, we can run around in a 4 or we can just essentially concede, and that's what they sort of did, and that's what I felt like Brisbane did on the weekend as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't be conceding when the bloke that you're conceding to is clearly the best key forward in the competition, one of the most accurate players in the competition, and probably the reason why they've won 6 games in a row at the moment. I appreciate that there's a lot more that goes into it. A bit like the Tom Stewart stuff. I can't work out why it's actually so hard to actually figure out. Like, you are playing on this guy, and if Riccardi or Cadman or Grzetzky wants to actually follow there, well, then you're making it a 4-player contest.
Yeah.
And if Jesse Hogan wants to outmark you in a 4-player contest as opposed to a 2-player contest, I'm taking those odds.
So I wonder now that, I mean, teams are smart. And you see how many people are in Carlton's coach's box when it panned up there. There's like 14, 15 of them, all with now that they've got time to work on this, I'm sure Fremantle will come up with something because they've had the evidence for a couple of weeks. Whereas if it happened the first time against Hawthorn, they go, players aren't prepared for it and you are going to concede. But when you're prepared for it, that's what I'm interested in the tactic against that and how hard they do fight. Because without Hogan, if you can get the matchup you want, then I mean, he's a big reason where they're at right now. Let's talk about Hawthorn. I mean, what does it look like from a stats point of view with what they're doing?
Yeah, I was really interested in what Jack Rewalt said at halftime of the coverage on Fox on Sunday, where he said that this is reminding him so much of Richmond 2017. And I thought that was a really good take. I thought, well, let's go away and have a bit of a deeper dive into what Hawthorn are doing at the moment over their last 6 weeks and what Richmond did in their last 6-7 weeks heading into their finals campaign. And it is so similar in terms of what's actually happening at the moment. Both were number 2 in the turnover game. Both forward 50s were functioning top 4 in the competition. Both were getting territory top 6 in the competition. Both were marking the footy around about 85 to 90 marks a game. Both were happy to flick the footy around by hand. Both were actually, not really getting any scoreboard return from their centre bounce work. It was more what they were doing from a system perspective. Both lost to Geelong, down in Geelong, in their last 6-7 games of the season.
Right.
Both played the MCG as well as any other teams in the competition. And we've spoken about this a lot, both prioritised the post-clearance work over what was actually happening at the pre-clearance phase. Both actually had losses during their season where, think of the GWS loss to Hawthorn and the Port Adelaide loss. Richmond had very similar losses during the year and learnt from it. Both had a very similar age and games profile to what they've got at the moment. The only difference is between the two
finish
is that one of them's going to start from outside the top 4 and the other one's going to start from inside the top 4. That's and we've seen this before, that it runs to a ground at some stage. That is the main difference and a significant difference, clearly. But in terms of how they're both playing, I think what Jack was saying is actually has some merit to it. What they can do from 6th, 7th or 8th, only time will tell. But how they're playing.
When there's so many interstate teams that are going to make up probably the top 6.
Going to be a big ask.
You just can't avoid getting on a plane and going to play in a really hostile environment where they're going to be up against it. But gee, it's been a wild ride. He asked you the guess who question, who is the 7th highest rated player in the last 6 weeks, and he plays for a bottom 4 side. A lot of answers coming through. Sheasel again, your favourite. You wouldn't have gone there, so we'll rule him out.
No.
Oscar Allen.
No.
Jack Sinclair.
No, very good. No, absolutely flying, but no,
Rowan
not
Marshall.
the answer. Good game on the weekend, but hasn't been dominant.
Rowan Marshall.
No.
Ben Keys from Matt.
Ben Keys is actually higher than number 7 in the comp.
Where is he?
He's absolutely number 4 over the last 6 weeks. Absolutely flying.
He is flying, actually. I love watching him play. He's very clever.
Love his effort, don't you?
Yeah, that's what I love as well.
Love to be his teammate.
But I reckon how smart he is gets overlooked because he looks like a real trier and the effort and the passion that he plays with. But I reckon he's an incredibly intelligent footballer as well. Speaking of Adelaide, Darcy Fogarty asked Dave.
Great shout. He's top 30, but not the 7th best player in the comp.
All right. I actually think my guess would be Dan Rioli from Richmond.
Yeah, how good was he on the weekend, Dan Rioli? But he's not in there. He's actually top 30 across the course of the season. It is Ben Keys and Darcy Fogarty's teammate, Riley Tilthorpe.
The thrill seeker.
Yes. He's absolutely
amazing.
He's absolutely flying. So
if you gave me 100 guesses, I wouldn't have got it.
So I just wanted to just give this guy a bit of a shout. So the last 2 weeks, he's been involved in 20 scores over the last 2 weeks, which is a ridiculous number for a key forward. So he's been the 4th best target in the competition since coming back. So 60% of the time, over 60% of the time, Adelaide go to him, they're scoring. He just looks massive ahead of the ball. He's the 5th best one-on-one player in the competition. And I think as a result of him coming back and Fogarty and Great Nick and Walker, now Adelaide, in all due respect, haven't got a lot going for them at the moment, right? Their contest game's not great. Their territory game's not great. Their ball movement game's not great. But their forward 50 is the 2nd best forward 50 in the comp. And they're scoring the 2nd most off stoppage in the comp. And you know my theory off that. The stoppage component is your talent ahead of the ball and behind the ball, not the system. So this talent ahead of the ball that Adelaide have got at the moment is functioning as well as anyone in the competition. And it's why they are a dangerous matchup for the remainder of the season against Port Adelaide and against Sydney.
Honestly, they ripped Port Adelaide to shreds last time they played. It was their
transition, wasn't
it? Their ability to get in behind. Port Adelaide's defence was an absolute mess. They defended too high. And that's when they looked their most threatening. But that's a big story for Riley Tilthorpe because he hasn't really... so he may have had a pre-season, but certainly has had a really interrupted year with his body. And the work that he's done clearly when he's been injured has been significant. You can see that. He's a worker. He loves to train. And you think, well, what can he be? Like what? Because he's got the engine, he's got the athleticism, and he's got the size to be as good a key forward as we've got for the next 5 years. And I think Adelaide should go into the off-season with some optimism around that. Seriously disappointing this year, there's no doubt about that. But they should have a level of optimism. And I think Lukosius works for them with Fogarty.
Half-back?
No, I think half forward. With Fogarty and Tilthorpe, I think he's the perfect third tall. And, I mean, you can play him a bit higher if you want because of his ball use, but you go Rochelle, you go Keys, you go Rankin, you go Tilthorpe, Fogarty and Lukosius. Is there a better front 6 in football than that? I don't know if there is. Of course, Rankin will play midfield as well, but I think there's reason to be optimistic if you're an Adelaide supporter off the back of having Tilthorpe if he can stay sound. All right, let's move on to the Cats.
Yeah, so just want to, so what Geelong are doing at the moment, there's been a lot of talk, have they gone under the radar? Well, the stuff that myself and Kingy track, without the footy, is first and foremost the key to success. And if you haven't got a strong without the footy profile, forget about having a chance in September. Right now, across the last 6 weeks and across the season, there's no better team in the competition at what they are doing defensively. They had that lapse for a 6, 7, 8 week period, but they've got that right back to again being the hardest team to play against, like they were in 2022. So they've got all aspects in terms of being able to deny the opposition from turning possession to score, deny the opposition moving the footy, holding up in their D50 and then winning the ball back between the arcs. What they have done over the last 6 weeks as well, which was their concern, and you mentioned this as well, and you were right to do so in the first part of the year, is what they were doing at clearance. Their midfield is getting absolutely ambushed.
The
last 6 weeks, the raw clearance differential is the 4th best in the competition, and importantly, the scoreboard return is the 3rd best in the competition. So obviously Dangerfield's up and going again. Stewart coming back in there has had a huge impact in this, and I'm interested that Chris has mentioned that, through injury and through, a little bit of poor form, they've had to expose a couple of these guys a bit earlier. So now they've actually played a fair bit of footy together. So, so Bose has been in there a fair bit. Atkins, Bruin have been in there a fair bit. And then you get the superstar Dangerfield back. My only question is on them, and this is why, you have to admire what they do in the coach's box, and they're just hard to play against. But have they got the offensive power and the talent to be able to compete in a prelim and potentially a grand final against Brisbane or the Dogs or Port? So right now, in terms of what they do, in terms of punishing the opposition off turnover, it's bottom 5 in the comp. Like 3 of their last 4 weeks, they've kicked 3 goals, 4 goals, and 4 goals off turnover. Like that's not an offensive threat that's going to get it done in a prelim. How far they can actually go with this defensive profile, that could get them to a prelim. But is it going to be enough to get them past that stage should they get there? I'm not, and it's not a crack at them.
No, it's not at all.
It's more actually recognising and praising what they do.
It's more in admiration that you think they've done it again to be in contention at this stage of the year. Somehow they found a way where we're probably writing them off again at some point throughout the year. But they're in the mix. And as a Geelong fan, or any fan, that's all you can ask. At round 20, is your team in the mix? Are we going to have an exciting September with some optimism that potentially, if things go well, we could have the time of our life? Well, yeah they could.
Maybe.
I don't think they will, but they're in the mix, and they've put themselves in a position to have that, and their draw to finish is favourable, which gives them an even better chance to.
Well, they could finish second.
Easily finish.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. All right, the Swans, did they do anything to suggest that they've turned the corner?
Not at all.
Okay.
And I think it's a massive. And I know everyone's talking about it from an Essendon perspective. I think it's a massive Friday night for Sydney. Like they, this is almost not the last because they're going to finish on top or top 2, whatever they're going to be. But at some stage, things are going to get going.
Game?
No, I don't think it's a get it done game because they actually need to actually get things going. They don't need to just get a win. They've just got to get things going from a system perspective because right now we talk about the turnover game being the absolute primary indicator for success. Over the last 6 weeks, only Richmond has a worse turnover game than what Sydney does heading into a final series. Right. And on Friday night, so we've spoken a lot about how teams are denying them corridor, forcing them to go long down the line. Collingwood again did that. Took away corridor, forced them to go long down the line, had to pull off aggressive kicks. They turned the footy over 25 times in their back half. Collingwood kicked 3 goals, 8 off it. Could have put them absolutely to the sword, and they do not win that game of footy. So the only thing I will say to this is if you take your mind back 6 weeks ago, Port Adelaide got over the line against St Kilda in a shocking game of footy.
Shocker.
But they just needed to win, and it got things going. That's why I think it's a massive Friday night on for Sydney against Essendon. Can that win, albeit fortunate, be the kickstart to actually get things going? Because if we're sitting here on Tuesday and it hasn't, you're almost going to be really surprised if any sort of real success comes this late in the season with this sort of profile.
All right, strong thoughts there on Sydney, which leads us to the Blues. Which it's fallen apart on a number of fronts. Where in particular is your focus?
So, a lot of talk has been around defensively and what's happening there, what have you. I just want to look at purely the first half against Hawthorn where the game was done. Forget about injuries.
Yeah.
The game was all over at halftime. And to me, they look a little bit confused in a couple of aspects, and it's more what they're doing offensively. So this year they've been more of a long down the line, not really going to go corridor too often. We're going to go long down the line, happy to go to contest and keep the game in contest for as much as we possibly can. Their ball movement has been the third worst in the competition because they don't really have that daring creativity.
Even when they're going well.
Even when they're going well. Third worst ball movement team from going one end of the ground to the other. So that's just not them, right? That hasn't been them. But then in the first half, I'm sitting back watching this going, Jesus, it looks aggressive. They're taking corridor double than what they usually do all season. Are they trying to actually open themselves up on offense to actually get things going? But what it did, it just invited Hawthorn along to play the corridor game, to play the aggressive game. So they've only scored 3 points out of their D50, but more importantly, they've given up 7 scores going back the other way. It looked like a very different and a very confused model. And then I'm looking at going, are they confused with this? And then are they confused with what they're doing with Chincotta as well?
What was with that?
So James Jordan, right, hadn't tagged for 5 or 6 weeks, which is a bit strange. Maybe they're giving him a bit of a rest or a bit of a freshen up. I'm not too sure. And then on Friday night, as I just said before, they didn't go too well, but at least Jordan got back to playing the role that made him really successful. Goes to Dacos, completely nullifies him. Tick, well done moving forward. Chincotta just played a role where it there was nothing, and there was no sort of real recognition or point of difference that he was playing. It was just like he was another member of this starting 22. Where when he was when Carlton were at their best, he was going to the opposition's most dangerous player and having a real impact. Yes, there were games where he was getting dragged around and things were happening, but I don't know. It just looks a little bit confused on a couple of fronts. Clearly, Sam Walsh isn't having the same impact, but what they're doing offensively on the weekend and then what they did with Chincotta, it just left me feeling confused. Not too sure if you feel the same in terms of what they're doing at the moment. I know there's injuries and there's a bit all over the shop, but yeah, it's a confused team to actually
and
work
they've lost
out
their
what's
power,
happening.
their on-ball power has been lost as well. They're scoring. Does that come up in this numbers as
yeah,
well?
Absolutely.
They're scoring from stoppage, which and centre bounce, which is when they're flying. I mean, that is so infectious. Every time you go back to a centre bounce, you go, okay, this is a real threat. Doesn't feel like there's that threat there anymore.
And they could pile goals on you quickly.
We saw that in the game that sticks out for me is that last quarter against Port Adelaide where Cripps went berserk.
Yeah.
And every time the ball went back to centre bounce, you go, they're going to score from here.
Yeah.
And they're all flying, they're all joining in, and the momentum that scoring gives you is infectious, but there's been none of that, not even a pulse in that aspect of it. So yeah,
it's an amazing turnaround.
It's a big story. There's no... undoubtedly, it's a big story, and personnel plays a role in this, but everything you've said also plays a more significant role as well. A couple of texts coming through. This one from Nat. Why is Nick Dacos not impacting games like he did in the first 2/3 of the season? His disposal has been pretty bad lately, asked Nat Hoyney.
Yeah, there's a few texts coming through re Nick Dacos, and I reckon that they're all spot on. So the last 6 weeks, he just isn't the same player with ball in hand. So in terms of what he's doing with the ball use component, he's 264th in the competition through impact with ball use. And I think that's just more on the role that he's getting asked to do, just being their absolute contest and clearance player. So I'll be really interested to see how Conley would address this in the midfield group in the off season this year, or do they just think it's mainly due to Tom Mitchell not being there, De Goey being injured this year, it will correct itself, or does it actually need to be addressed, through bringing in personnel outside the footy club? Because Nick needs to be that one that's winning almost 30 to 40% of his ball contested, not 50 to 60% of his ball contested, I think.
All right. I hope that answers your question there, Nat. Who did the coaches miss? Hoyney will start on Friday night.
So Warner and Heaney get all the love for what they did in the last quarter, which is fair enough. I just want to add another player to this, which is Luke Parker. Luke Parker's last quarter when he got thrown into the midfield and to become that centre bounce player. Had 7 disposals, 6 contested possessions, 4 clearances, involved in 3 scores. Ended up being the 3rd highest rated player on the ground. Luke Parker didn't get a vote. Saturday afternoon, Finn Callaghan for GWS. Thought that was one of his more impactful games this year. We had him as the highest rated player on the ground, didn't get a vote. And I reckon the split, bit like what we were just talking about with Nick Dacos there, 7 contested possessions, 17 uncontested possessions. made him have the third most impact of any player with ball use on the weekend. That's his asset. Doesn't need to be the inside contest clearance player. Get the ball in his hands to have damage through the ball use that he has.
For the Bombers?
Bombers, so Dylan Shield, so he was the third highest rated player on the ground. Didn't get a vote from the coaches. That was his highest rated game of his season. Interestingly, his last 2 games has had some significant impact with ball in hand, which is probably not what we've associated with him for a number of years. So well done there to Dylan Shield.
And what about for the Hawks? A player who's had a really good season, I reckon.
Yeah, he has. And yes, this is James Warple. So other than Weddle, he was the second highest rated player on the ground against Carlton. And that was actually his highest rated game since round 3 this year. So nice even balance between what he was able to do in all 3 phases of the game on the weekend. So it just adds to that even midfield mix that Hawthorn currently have at their disposal.
And finally, a player who's got himself into some reasonable form.
Yeah, he has. So Tim Membry, second highest rated player on the ground in the Richmond v St Kilda game, is actually in pretty good form at the moment. 11 goals in the last 4 weeks, involved in 30 scores over the last 4 weeks. So he's actually, providing a bit of a danger inside that forward 50 without Max King being there over the last period of time. So well done there to Tim Membry.
All right, Hoyney's here. Could you guys talk about the impact Weddle is having at Hawthorn? Seems a genuine utility, almost like a Cooter type, very tall, strong, fast and mobile with great endurance. What a find. Wonder where he ends up, Josh Weddle.
So 2 players from the week. Where does Mac Andrew end up and where does Weddle end up? Like, they're 2 players that I'd be so excited to have them on your list and working out where to actually position these guys moving forward.
Ends up back only because of King and Walter you've invested heavily in. I'm not sure Mac Andrew fits in and amongst those 2, but he definitely fits as what I think is going to be the best interceptor in football for the next 5 to 6 years.
I said this to someone yesterday, I'm not sure if you agree. I reckon he's the most competitive key position player under the age of 25 in the comp.
Good question.
I love the fact that he gave away that 50-metre penalty on the weekend. I know that sounds silly. I love the blue that he had at halftime where he just wanted to keep going. And then even having a crack at some teammates because he just wants to win. So
0433 98 11 16, most competitive key position player under the age of 25. Send those through. A thing that you've added to your portfolio this year has been the most damaging player for the round. Who was it?
Yeah, so Max Gawn comes out as the best player from the weekend. That was the 3rd highest rated game by any ruckman this year. Ball use, no player had greater impact than Josh Weddle through ball in hand on the weekend. Tristan Cherry with his ball winning ability, no 30. Player had great. Yeah, he was fantastic. His contest and clearance work was brilliant. And then through his defensive action, Sam Collins had the most impact of any player through their defensive work on the weekend.
All right, and before we let you go, it's been an amazing body of work once again. What was your gem for the round?
Gem, just a weird game Sunday afternoon at Marvel. 63 tackles between St Kilda and Richmond. That's the fewest in a match in 18 years.
Circle work, you called it.
It was definition of absolute circle work on the weekend. And then the horror to finish. So unfortunately, North fans, you've now lost 3 games this year where you've been in front by 5+ goals. No team has done that 3 times in a season since 2017, Richmond. So it's a hard one to watch, unfortunately, for North supporters.
They need to fix their signs on the bench for what you need to do when you've got to protect the lead, but probably knocked off Hawthorn for the worst come-from-behind loss this year, I reckon, considering
3 goals in 2 minutes.
Window of time that they had to win that game of football. Great stuff, Hoyney. Appreciate it.